Today's episode of the Heart Centre Business Podcast is quite a rant, but it's also practical to help you improve your messaging significantly. Today, I want to talk about the difference between process-focused messaging and outcome-focused messaging, and how to incorporate a strong balance in your messaging so that you're not leaning one way or the other. I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of each. I'm going to talk about some of the risks of being overly focused on one over the other. I'm also going to break down some agitation, admiration, yucky marketing strategies, and we'll probably get ranty about some things in between. This is episode number 458, which means you can find all the relevant links and the show notes for today's episode over at tashcorbin.com/458. I've got some cool free resources for you to help with this episode. Let's dive in. Hello, I'm Tash Corbin, a business strategist and mentor based on the Sunshine Coast in Australia. The mission of this podcast is to help heart-centered entrepreneurs to make more money, and in doing so, change the world for the better. This podcast was recorded on the lands of the Gubbi Gubbi and Jinnaburra people. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. I've noticed in recent years, probably the last 2 years, that there has been a big move towards outcome-focused messaging in the online business space. But I want to break down what outcome messaging is and why I think that it's not a better alternative to existing messaging strategies. And in fact, it's just a small part of the messaging puzzle. So first and foremost, what is outcome messaging and what's the alternative? Well, outcome-focused messaging just talks about the results of working with you. So my client got this result, I've earned this amount of money. When you learn this one secret, you'll have 3x your income, right? So that kind of messaging that only talks about the results. So it might look like it's giving advice, but the advice is actually focused on the result. Once you sort your messaging, you'll attract super motivated clients too, right? The result is attracting super motivated clients. When you finally give up your addiction to drama, you will magically manifest your soulmate, right? So it's basically couching that there's a tiny little secret thing that you need to do that you probably should have done by now that will get you these amazing results. Getting the result is so simple and easy, and it's overly focused on really looking at what that result is. So you'll see people who are overly focused on outcome messaging consistently sharing client results, sharing their own results, and sharing advice that basically says when you do this secret thing, your results will magnify. You will get X results. It's a no-brainer. Of course, the results will come. So that's what I mean by outcome-focused messaging. The alternative to outcome-focused messaging is process-focused messaging. And process-focused messaging is what you do with people. So explaining your work, explaining your process. So it's things like the steps that you walk through when you work with your clients, and you talk about the steps that you do with people and why you do it that way. Talking about what's included when people work with you, the modules inside your programs and why you've sequenced those modules in that way. The actions that people take when they work with you or when they're doing your program. It's also what you get your clients to do as their homework in order to elicit change or get their results. So you're focused on your process, the process your clients undertake when they work with you. So you might think that I would be pushing you to one or the other, right? Like outcome-focused messaging can often look a little snake oil, like there's this like secret magic beans that like you just get the magic beans and everything's going to be okay. Like it can sometimes be a little off-putting because like, but how do I know that what you teach me is actually going to work for me? And one of the biggest downfalls of outcome-oriented messaging is because you're consistently talking about client results, you can often be pitching those or presenting those to lead people to believe they are normal, expected results. And therefore, if people join and don't get that level of results, it leads to buyer's remorse, buyer dissatisfaction, complaints, refund requests, and negative reviews. We've also seen in recent years in Australia several court cases where it was successfully shown that a seller or a network marketing company has presented beyond or above average results as typical results so consistently that a reasonable person would assume that they would get similar results, and therefore when they haven't, they have been successful at a legal challenge of that provider. And we've also seen regulatory bodies successfully prosecute companies and in particular network marketing companies recently for those outcome-based claims being presented as typical results when they are not typical. And I should say that one of the big ones in particular, I shared it on my socials, you may have seen a couple of months ago, had disclaimers on their sales pages and in their new member sign-up kits that said these results are not typical, but it was found in court that those disclaimers were not enough to counteract the heavy outcome-based marketing messaging that was used, and that it was very reasonable that people would assume those results were very achievable upon joining the network marketing company or upon completing the program because of the way that they were presented on social media and on sales webinars. So it's been really interesting to see some of those cases. Now, we don't have to go all the way down the legal pathway. I also think that from a values alignment perspective, or what is actually something that I want to do from a moral perspective, leading people to believe that huge results are the norm and not talking about the process to get there can lead people to believe that there's not a lot of work involved between where they are and the results that they want to get. And we're going to talk about that in the downsides of outcome marketing. But in a nutshell, outcome marketing is so focused on results and outcomes and does not provide adequate information about how those results are generated or the steps that you take people through to get those results. Process-oriented or process-focused messaging, on the other hand, is about what you do with people. So that's the steps that you take people through. You might, in your process-oriented messaging, be talking about what are the steps that people undertake when they work with you. What are some of the things people need to do when they work with you to get towards working towards those results? What's included inside packages working with you or your courses and program offerings? What modules you have there and why you put them in that particular order or why you teach those modules? What are the actions that people will take when they join your program? What you get your clients to do. So outcome messaging just talks about the results. Process messaging just talks about the process or the actions that people take and that you take with your clients. So ultimately, which is better? Well, I think it's clear that you need both. Sometimes people are so shy of talking about the results of working with them because they don't want to seem like a snake oil salesperson that they don't talk about outcomes at all in their messaging. And so the risk of doing that and being all process oriented is that you're only talking about the work and you make it sound very hard. And there's no connection between doing that work with you and the result that is reasonable for people to expect from doing that work with you. So you might assume that it's more moral or it's more appropriate or values aligned or consent based to only talk about process in your messaging, but actually it's important that you connect the process to the outcomes. But We do that in a way where you're not presenting your top 1% of client results as typical. We do that in a way where you're speaking to what people can reasonably expect as a result of doing that work with you. So, what are the risks of using outcome-only messaging? Well, there is that sense that you're selling magic beans. I don't understand what it is that you'll actually do with me. And you've minimized what we do together so much that you may end up only attracting people who don't want to do any work. They're just looking for that get rich quick, that get the result quick kind of outcome. It can attract also people who are so fixated on the results that they're not willing to do some of that self-reflection, or they're not being honest about their starting point with you. So I've seen this happen to someone in the past where they talk about helping people go from 5-figure months to 6-figure months, but they have a lot of people who buy from them who aren't having 5-figure months yet. But they've decided, because they don't know what the process is, they've decided, well, I'm having 4-figure months and I'd rather have 6-figure months, so I can just leap over and do it all. And so you have a lot of people join with unrealistic expectations, or who aren't honest or upfront about their starting point. They like to think they're ready for what it is that you've got to offer, but they're not actually ready. They just want the outcome. One of the other risks of using outcomes only is that it requires the agitation and admiration marketing approach in order to get those sales coming in. So you don't just talk about potential results. You don't just talk about the outcomes your clients have. My client made this much. I've made this much money, or I found my soulmate in 6 weeks. You can too. You also need to agitate their current state. So a lot of the outcome-focused marketing and messaging is focused on making people feel uncomfortable with where they are and uncomfortable that they haven't figured it out yet. It almost positions you as this expert, this keeper of the secret, but the secret is just this tiny little thing, and anyone who hasn't figured out the secret yet is a bit silly. And like, why haven't you done it already? Like, if you'd done it yesterday, you would have tripled your income by now. And it really minimizes the workload involved, but it also then relies on you speaking down to your audience and speaking to your audience from a space of the haves and the have-nots. I'm part of the haves because I've done this bit, and you're the have-nots because you haven't. And so that agitation, admiration marketing, when it comes down to it, a lot of people, particularly those who follow me, who are wanting to do like that consent-based marketing and that heart-centered approach to sales and marketing, don't feel comfortable with how they come across when they use admiration and agitation marketing. And when they look back at what they've been sharing from a content perspective, it makes them feel a bit yucky. So not only does it have the risk of attracting more refunds and more buyer dissatisfaction, more people who don't actually want to do the work because you're not talking about the work, you're only talking about the results, but it can also make you feel a bit yucky in the way that you have to do your messaging and show up and do your marketing, and the way that you speak down to people. A lot of people find it really challenging to consistently share that messaging, and they'll do it when someone tells them to for a little while, but then it starts to make them feel weird in the tummy. Anyway, so we don't want to do outcome only, but we don't want to do process only either. If you're focused only on your process and you're only talking about the work that you do, the steps that you take people through, you're only like talking people through how to do this, how to do that. Number one, as I said before, you're not connecting it with the result. So it's not really motivating or incentivizing anyone to pay you. But it can also mean that most of your content feels like it's instructive. Most of your content is talking through the process, teaching others the process. So it can also mean that if that's all you're doing, it can feel like there's no reason to pay you. There's no reason to work with you because you've already taught me the process and you've already showed me the steps you take people through. And so it gives people a lot more sense that they should try and do it on their own first. And I'm not saying that that's something you might not want to do, right? You might want to encourage people to try it out for themselves first, but it almost delays people from making a decision as to how, like whether they buy from you to fast track that process and fast track those results from that process. And so process only messaging can also have its downfalls. Now, the core thing I want to say to this though is that when I talk to people about this process-oriented versus outcome-oriented messaging, a lot of people that I work with one-on-one, that's the first thing I'll go and look at on their socials. Like, are you using process-oriented? Are you using outcome-oriented? What's the balance here? Is that a lot of people struggle with actually marrying the two together. They've learned how to talk about their process from one mentor, and they've learned outcome-focused marketing from another. And so they just have a mix of the two. But it's not about just mixing it up. It's learning how to weave them together and sew them together. So in the show notes of today's episode, I have popped a link to my core messaging freebie. And in that, we work on your value proposition table. And this is one way that I help you weave process and outcomes together, because you're not just talking about the before and after, you're also talking about why that's valuable. And in the bridge messaging part of your core messaging document, we put together your messaging to demonstrate where people might have misdiagnosed what the process is that they need to follow, or what their steps are, or what's between them and their goal, and help to facilitate that light bulb moment of, oh, I see, I actually need X, Y, and Z. And if I do X, Y, and Z with you, I will go from here to where I want to be. And that's valuable to me because there's more pieces to that messaging puzzle than simply explain your process, tell everyone what results people get. And that explain your process, tell everyone what results people will get form of messaging is very rudimentary, and it's, I don't want to say it, but it's very basic, right? It's old school, very basic kind of marketing, and it doesn't particularly work effectively online because it's what every random person who's dialing in their messaging shares. Here's the 5 steps of how we work together. Here's the results you can expect, or here's the results my clients got. Here's how much it costs you. It's not as simple as that, because in a lot of cases, your audience don't actually yet agree with you on what steps they need to be taking yet. So for example, when people come and follow me, they often think they need to reach more people online and grow their audience. But one of the big light bulbs people have when they follow me is if they're not converting the audience they have, then growing their audience with new people is not going to actually grow their results. And if they want to grow their results, they need to get better at converting the audience they have and looking after the audience they have. And the audience you have is your leverage point into growing your audience into new spaces. So that's a little rudimentary example of like that light bulb, and people go, oh, I finally get it. I've got 42 followers on my Facebook page, but I'm making 0 sales. If I have 4,200 followers on my Facebook page, I'll still make 0 sales because my problem is a conversion problem, and I won't solve that with an audience growth solution, with a reach solution. So if you want to dive into that core messaging piece and bringing together process and outcome orientations of your messaging together, I would highly recommend you head to the show notes of today's episode at tashcorbin.com/458 and use that core messaging freebie to help you round out your messaging and bring a little more balance. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Heart Centered Business Podcast. Until next time, I cannot wait to see you shine. Bye for now.